So we're looking here at part 19 in our series on hydrotherapy, theory and practice. And as we start out, it's just always important to remember that as you navigate any health challenge, you want to have a practitioner of health that has a similar philosophy of care as you do, and that the things that we talk about here are just extra tools in your toolbox that help you get well or help you stay well. And any type of protocol that comes your direction, you should always do your due diligence and make sure that it's the right thing for you, not blindly accepting anything without doing your due diligence and research. Thomas Edison said back in 1903 that the doctor of the future wouldn't be giving medicine. And it doesn't seem like the doctor of the future is here yet, but instead they'd be instructing the patient in the care of the human frame and diet and the cause and prevention of disease. And even before that, in 1885, there was a quote from Ellen White that says, there are many ways of practicing the healing art, but there's only one way that heaven approves. And those are basically the pure air, water, cleanliness, proper diet, purity of life, simple agencies of nature that don't tax or debilitate the system. Most people don't take the time to learn these things, but they are much less expensive, both in the expense and the effect on the body. 3 John 1 verse 2 adds another element to that as well. Beloved, I pray that you may prosper in all things and be in health just as your soul prospers. So we also need to take care of our spiritual life and our soul to make sure that our physical health is in its optimum top form. Paul in Romans 12:1-2 said, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. And admonish us to not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. Because our bodies are the temple of the Holy Spirit, and He desires to live in us, and we do best when He is living in us, we need to make sure that we take care of our bodies and our physical powers. We're fearfully and wonderfully made, and He encourages us to make our bodies our study and understand its needs and act our part in preserving it from harm and defilement. It's from the Ministry of Healing. So we're going to move on into the localized hot application and large area hot application hydrotherapy procedure. And this will be using hot blankets that are wrapped around the affected area. So it could be a limb, could be a specific area of the torso, but they can also be the entire body. So the hot blankets in heat just give off heat along with the blanket or the water blanket as well. So looking at a full hot blanket pack implementation, the goal is to initiate sweating, and sweating is the key factor. If there isn't sweating that occurs, you want to stop that procedure because sweating helps to keep the person cool, but is also the primary outcome that is being sought in the treatment. Helps to move toxins out of the body, draws blood away from areas that of congestion, whether that be mucus congestion or blood congestion, and typically that's the area directly below where the pack is applied. So it's most effective with a wet blanket next to the skin. And we'll talk about that wet blanket. The wet blanket is actually a hot water blanket. And because the idea is you're going to have a warming effect from the whole treatment, as opposed to a cold treatment. So it can be localized on a particular organ or system, and it can be or generalized for systemic congestion, whether that be mucus congestion or circulatory congestion. Congestion basically just means that it's slowing down its movement and not moving through the area efficiently. And you obtain the benefit from the sweating that it induces. So it's helpful in early fevers, colds, the flu, which was known in the old days as grip. They respond well to this treatment. And it's much like a fever treatment, although fever isn't induced in the treatment. So conditions that the hot blanket pack can benefit is uremia. So essentially that's an elevated urea content and nitrogenous waste elements due to kidney function changes. Eclampsia, that's essentially seizures or coma onset. Now, when this is happening, the person isn't going to be able to communicate with you well. So it's very important that you take very cautious steps in the application of this procedure so that there aren't any burning that takes place just because the water is hot and they can't communicate to you on the blankets. Acute Bright's disease essentially is inflammation of the kidney and the nephrons. So there's a picture down here of a kidney. The calyx, the major minor calyx, are those triangular sections that then move into the pelvis, which is the area where the urine is collected, and then moves down to that tube, that funnel-like tube, which is the ureter. The ureter that goes down to the bladder area, and then the urethra is what would conduct that to the exterior of the body. So renal insufficiency, essentially the kidney not being able to keep up with its duties, or renal congestion. So it helps to eliminate those. It can be very helpful in pneumonia, typhoid fever. It can be helpful on that on occasion. And then kidney and gallstones also respond well. It helps to eliminate the high renal blood pressure that it comes with having some blockages occurring. So those are a number of different things that this hot blanket pack can be beneficial for. So the supplies that you would utilize: 2 double blankets. So essentially that's a blanket that's large enough to be folded in half and have 2 layers. Or if you have a single and a double, that's fine too. The most profound insulating effect and heating effect will be with a double blanket application. 4 water bottles, and these are going to be half filled with water that's 160 degrees Fahrenheit. And this temperature may vary depending on the application. We'll mention some temperature variations that may be appropriate given the condition of the individual being helped. So 4 of those water bottles. So it might be good to have a number of those on hand. A pail, a bowl. So you see a bowl there, a wash basin of ice water. You're going to be using that for some cold compresses to the head area. And then have some compresses ready for the head and the neck and the heart area. Sometimes people experience tachycardia, which is an increased heart rate, elevated heart rate, and the cold compress to the chest helps to bring that down. 2 Turkish towels, basically just a nice heavy nap towel is what the Turkish refers to. A water glass and a straw, and that will be for drinking either warm or cold fluids depending on the situation. And then a pitcher of hot water for drinking. So you're going to be in this case, you're going to be drinking warm water or hot water to help do interior thermal heating as well as external thermal heating for the individual who's being assisted here. So the procedure for applying the hot blanket pack starts with giving a hot foot bath and drinking hot water. So essentially the hot foot bath is a mechanism of essentially helping the body feel warm all over. So if someone's cold and they have cold feet, if you get their feet warm, they tend to have a much better body temperature overall. And then a thermal heating on the interior with the drinking of hot water. So it warms the core and the entire body in preparation for the hot blanket application. So a double blanket is then laid on the table. So that's a double thickness, 2 layers thick. That's going to need to be a pretty good sized blanket because it's going to wrap around them. So that's important to know. So they have a cold compress to the head while they're sitting up and their feet are still in the hot water bath. So you've got their feet warmed, and then you are going to do a temperature contrast, cold to the head, warm to the feet. That's going to move the blood around. And then you want to prepare a single or double blanket for wringing out for a hot, wet blanket. So basically you would twist it up, lie it near your boiling water pan or large vessel. Could be a wash basin that's been warmed up because it's going to need to have a pretty good sized volume of water to wet that blanket. And then have that ready to be wrung out. It may be helpful to have a partner there to help wring it out, but you can also use a wringer from a wringer washer setup. And those are available brand new. This one here is from Layman's on a wash tub. You can get them individually. You can also find antique ones that are available too that still function just fine. But that's going to squeeze the majority of the water out and would eliminate the wrist twisting action, and could be done by an individual rather than having to have an extra hand for that particular part. So dip the center of the blanket into the boiling water, basically just keeping the ends non-wet so that you can hold on to them without burning yourself, and then wring it out. And then the excess water left on it would accelerate the cooling. So you don't want to have excess water. You want to have it nicely wrung out. So it's just a wet, moist, hot towel, but not dripping. So the excess water is going to have a higher heat capacity. So it is going to have a more likelihood of burning because it's higher heat. So you want to wring it out as dry as possible. And that wringer is a good way to do that. So it actually accelerates the cooling later if that water is excessively present. So quickly unfold that, spread over the dry blanket on the table or bed. So we have a table here, you have a double blanket that's laid on that, and then you're going to lay on top of that your wet double blanket or single blanket. So this is just illustrating a type of a table or a bed that could be laid upon. Then allow the person to lie on the hot blanket. And if the person is weak, you're going to need to assist them in this process and just take care to ease them over onto it. Cover them with a hot blanket as soon as possible and keep the head clear, so you're not going to be totally encapsulating them or mummifying them in the blanket, but just keep that head free and over the shoulders and all the way down to the feet. The wet blanket should touch the skin. So you're lying on top of that wet blanket that's on top of the blanket below that is dry. So you don't want any air spaces or pockets. So kind of tuck them in like you used to tuck your kids into bed with the blanket tucked right around tight, because you don't want air spaces, because that will accelerate the cooling effect of it. And right now what we're interested in is a warming effect that will result in sweating. So you can put a hot water bottle between the legs, so up between the thighs, just above the knees. Put a second water bottle at the feet. You may want to add a sweater to that just to protect it from burning. Potentially, you want 2 additional ones laid along the outside of the torso, and those are going to be warm. You can also do that with hot fomentation along the side, but those need to be changed out every 10 minutes. So a hot water bottle is a better way to do that. So have dry flannel between the bottle and the wet flannel. Which is the wet flannel is going to be right against the skin. You want it to keep it warm, but you don't want it to excessively warm it so that it burns the individual inside. So that flannel will maintain the heat, but protect the person inside. So you do want to make sure that you can communicate. If there is someone who is incommunicado, someone who's unconscious or not able to speak for some reason, or if they have some neurological issues where they don't have a high pain sensation, for example, like diabetes that has peripheral neuropathy associated with it, or any type of peripheral neuropathy. You want to make sure that there is maybe more insulation between the water bottles and the blankets. You'll still get the same effect, maybe not quite as pronounced, but you would rather err on that side than err on burning anybody accidentally. So tuck in the blanket well. Again, tuck the person in like you'd be tucking in your kid into bed. Just nicely make sure there's no air pockets left around. So the dry blanket is going to be over it, over the feet, the shoulders, and the neck. So remember, you still have the feet in the hot water bath. So you're going to want to have your bed covered with initially with a sheet to keep it dry, but then you want to have the feet able to be covered and tented over so they can stay in the hot water bath. So a cold compress, you want to have that to the head now and the neck. So you're going to be keeping the head cool. You don't want the cranial temperatures to increase, because if they go into excessive temperatures, that can cause some denaturing of proteins and breakdown of neurological tissue, and that's not a good idea. And you want to take caution because there could be rapid heart rate. So I want to be monitoring that on a regular basis. And if there is an increase in heart rate, tachycardia, you want to be sure you put that cold compress or ice bag to the heart area right away if necessary. And that'll bring the heart rate back down. So what you're looking for again is profuse sweating. So lots of perspiration on the skin. You can see that on the forehead, on the face, because you're not going to be able to see the other parts of the body very well. It will increase the moisture content. If there isn't sweating that's occurring, it's not a procedure that's working. They should be sweating within 10 minutes time. If they're not sweating within 10 minutes time, you should probably try to reinitiate the process. Maybe give them a break and try it again. The wet blanket next to the skin enhances the sweating versus a dry blanket. You could do a hot, dry blanket, but it's not going to do the sweating near as well as that wet blanket that's been run through the ringer. So drinking hot water with a straw can also assist along with that hot foot bath, and then the hot water bottles also aid in prolonging that sweating effect or that warming effect to increase the likelihood of perspiration. So keep the blankets draped over the legs. If you're giving a foot bath at the same time, you want to make sure that there aren't drafts. They're going to be coming in and causing excessive cooling that can also lead to chilling, because the whole idea of this is to warm the person up. So continue that pack for 20 or 30 minutes or until the heating effect diminishes or goes away and goes down. So that would be for initiating sweating in that hot blanket pack. If you're doing it for a toning or a tonic effect, just do it for 5 to 10 minutes only, and that's basically helping to sweat out impurities and toxins just for a short duration. So you can use it for a shorter period of time, but longer periods for the other things that were indicated earlier. So at the end of the treatment, when you're concluding the pack, you want to uncover just one body region at a time. So the lower picture, you can see here that the person's arm is out. They're still covered up amply. They have the cold pack on their head. And the attendant is giving them a cold mitten friction rub over the area. So that helps to stimulate circulation. You can do it with a cold towel if you don't have the cold mittens. And then recover that area with dry bedding and a blanket, and then go to the next area. So do the arms to chest first, then the abdomen to the legs. So you're going to be removing the blankets and finishing with them back in place. So some cautions. You want to be careful not to burn the person who's being assisted. So make sure that you communicate with them. Remember that sometimes there are people who don't have ability to communicate due to the maybe unconscious or maybe their age or some other factor, not be able to communicate effectively. Even it could be a language barrier. So don't forget about language barriers as being a potential for being a hindrance to communication. Usually you can figure out a sign or a way to do that, to communicate, but just keep that in mind. So the first application of a hot, wet blanket, just make sure that it's not too hot. And also the water bottles, have extra flannel handy that you can add into and insert between the hot water bottles and the wet blanket. Now that wet blanket, remember, is hot. It's a hot, wet blanket that's been wrung out through a wringer so that it's hot and wet, but not dripping. So the time when the perspiration begins, it must be within about 10 minutes. If there's no perspiration, you should stop the treatment and kind of reset, maybe take a break and come back and try it again. There may be reasons why they aren't perspiring. So people with a lack of sensitivity to heat or an inability to communicate, you want to make sure that maybe you just use a dry hot blanket versus a wet one next to the skin. There's much less opportunity for burning with a blanket that is dry and hot. People with diabetes or dropsy / edema or unconscious without neurological sensations, can't communicate. Make sure that you do that very carefully so you don't burn them. Hot water bottles, you want to make sure that they're well insulated if you're working with people like this, or use cooler water. So remember the temperature was 160 degrees Fahrenheit for someone who's very able to communicate. If there's someone who's not able to communicate, you might want to go 150, 140 or less, depending on the individual. So take those things into consideration when applying this method of hydrotherapy. So if you'd like to review this, you can go to preparingforthetimeoftrouble.com, also a place where you can learn about sustainable gardening, homestead remedies, as well as many topics on Earth's final warning in preparation for Christ's second coming.